All right, welcome Dr. Maya Ziegler of Monarch Family Chiropractic. Tonight's workshop is sitting. And I find that this is, if there is a conversation that is relevant to our modern world, it is sitting. I don't know how long ago, but somebody came out stating that sitting is the new smoking, which is a pretty, I think, bold statement, because we can all agree that smoking is pretty detrimental to our health, right? We're breathing in chemicals, and that is filling our lungs with tar and shortening our lifespan, and has all of these other morbid components of how it impacts our health. Sitting is also as impactful or more impactful than smoking. And you'll understand when we dive into the workshop tonight. And my hope is that with this workshop, I mean, every time I talk about and get into the research that shows how sitting is detrimental to our health, every time it helps hold me accountable to doing what is most right in the moment, right? We all know the things, and it's hearing the things that help support making the most right decision in our day-to-day life. Because our goal, we're looking at the long game, is that 20, 30 years from now, we want you expressing a higher level of potential, a higher level of health than you are today, so that you're able to do all the things you love to do, hopefully in a retired state, right? So let's get into sitting. So this first slide here, I think, is valuable just to understand that we all have habits. We all are living our life in a routine way. And I think it's important to really assess, are the things that we're choosing to do on a regular basis, are they helping or are they harming us, right? And sitting is a byproduct of, a work environment, a world that is very much, technologically, life, I guess. A lot of the workforce is required to be on computers, certainly with COVID and going remote, and actually more people are trying to move into a more remote setting of wanting to be working from home. And so where does that put us? On a computer, on Zoom, on email, right? So how does that lifestyle impact your health? Is it helping or harming? And so before we get into really the research around sitting, I think it's important to understand how many hours in a day are you sitting. And this is what the research shows, is that the average person lives a pretty sedentary lifestyle. So sitting does not necessarily equal, or this slide, it says, how sedentary is the typical American each day? I found that, for 21 hours of the 24-hour day, we are sedentary. Just so you understand, sedentary does include sleeping. Okay, it includes when we are inactive. And so sleeping is a chunk of that time frame. And of the 21 hours, 8 hours of that is sleeping. So you take 8 from that number, and now we're getting into, what is that, 13 hours. So 13 hours of our waking day, we are sedentary. And so what does that include? Sitting at work, watching TV, even our leisure time includes sitting. We're on a computer, we're eating, we're commuting, right? So I want you to start thinking about, how many hours a day am I sitting, and include all of it, not just when you're working, but include all of it, because we're going to get into specific numbers that you're going to want to keep your sitting time frame, cumulative sitting time frame under, to try and target, how to support this habit being more healthful instead of more harmful. So understand that our day is designed to be more sedentary. And when we are more sedentary, we are at risk for, dis-ease and illness and chronic stress. So When is the best time to make changes? Now, exactly now. I think we've all made New Year's resolution and think, man, if I would have just done something then, I'd be in a different place now. And so I think we kind of wrap our heads around, oh my goodness, I need to do all these things, but it starts with one. And if you just make one decision now to make a change, that has a domino effect down the road. So this is my challenge to you, is first identifying how many hours a day you're sitting, and when do you start changing that? You start changing that now. Okay. We are always a decision away from changing our life, truly. And only we can make that change. So because we spend a lot of time in front of, consuming media, so in front of a computer screen or in front of a TV screen or in front of our phones, I think it's just really nice to understand, well, what consumption does that include? So this is from 2010 to 2015. I realize this is old data. Do you think our activities and consumption has changed in 8 years?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you've got all sorts of apps on our Apple TV where we can get into HBO and we can get into Prime TV and we can get into Hulu and Netflix, and, and people are still paying for cable, and you can access those on your iPad, on your phone, right? Now we have watches, right? People are calling us and we're able to talk to them on our watches. And so understand this has changed, but it's likely, still a bulk of our life, a lot of our life. So you can see that this bottom bar, that's TV. And you can see through that 5-year span that our TV consumption hasn't really changed much. And as you look at that next bar up, that's internet. And you can see how, our internet usage has certainly changed. Okay, and you can actually see, if you look at that top, frame of 500 minutes, in 2010, we weren't quite reaching that. And it's really slowly increasing in terms of consumption of using more media. Let's see, outdoor. So this is interesting. Outdoor, I looked that up. That is billboards and things, signage that we see on a day-to-day basis. That's how much we're consuming in terms of advertising, just outside of our regular use, which is actually a significant number. Then you've got radio, newspapers, magazines, and cinema. You can't even see that slice of cinema up there. But you can see that majority of it is personal use. I mean, all of it's personal use, but I think when you're looking at newspapers, magazine, cinema, you really have to kind of go outside your routine or schedule to say, how can I pick up a newspaper or a magazine, right? Or get on into a movie theater. So this stuff is very much available to us all the time. And so looking at a few more, and again, 500 minutes a day, that's 8 hours. If we go back to that slide, this is media consumption, 500 minutes a day, 8 hours. That's a lot. Here's another slide. Average waking hours are estimated to be around 18 hours. So 11 hours of our day are spent on media. Here's another, I'll have to look and see when this came out in terms of the year, but almost 5 hours on live TV. Okay, live TV is not the time shifted TV. So this is definitely probably changed because now we have all those apps. Anyway, I think you get the picture. We're spending a lot of time. So what happens when we sit for 9.6 hours a day? And we already know that we're spending 8 hours a day on media, right? So when we're spending 9.6 hours a day, this is kind of what we're seeing happen in terms of research. So every extra 2 hours of sitting is linked to an 8% increased risk of colon cancer. So we're seeing a potential link to cancer. We see increased joint pain, increased neck pain, increased back pain, just because of how we're sitting for long periods of time without really moving our body. And our body was meant to move. And I think we can all agree that when we are in a state of like, I am doing my job and I am working, I mean, we get real close to that computer screen and we are staring and we get totally lost in terms of time, right? And then we realize, oh my goodness, it's been 2 hours, I haven't moved my body, right? Oh, I don't feel so good, or I feel tight or tense. And that's happening day in and day out. So it's a problem. Sedentary people, which we know that we are sedentary for 21 of the 24 hours a day, are 200% more likely to have heart problems. That's a big number. And then 25% of men, 15% of, or excuse me, 25% of women, 15% of men have visible varicose veins. So we know that if it don't look good, that kind of pushes us to maybe do something more about it. You know, so even looking at postural distortions and looking at, you know, having varicose veins, if sitting is contributing to that, then that maybe would get us to stand up more. And so this slide is just talking about, you know, how when you're sitting for longer periods of time, how it impacts your sleep. We all understand the importance of sleep. I heard this analogy, I don't know, maybe a couple months back, in terms of what happens when we sleep. When we get into the sleep, we actually see our brain shrinks and we have something called our lymphatic system that becomes much more active. It's like our lymphatic system, which moves fluids from the body and gets rid of any stuff and pushes it out through our kidneys into our bladder and we get rid of it. Okay. The brain has a glymphatic system and we didn't know about it until, I don't know, 8-10 years ago. And that's because it only comes online when we're sleeping and when we get into a certain sleep state. That's where it comes online. So the brain actually shrinks down, this glymphatic system comes online and gets all the toxins, chemicals, any excess stuff that the brain is producing, gets rid of it. So when you have a good night's sleep, like, oh, I feel so good, I can think clearly, I have energy, that's because you literally, your body has removed stuff from the brain for you to think more clearly. Likewise, if you didn't get good sleep, you have had a late night, you were consuming some, you know, stresses to the body, didn't get good sleep, you wake up, you're like, oh, I just can't think clearly. Well, your brain is literally bogged down, right? So sleep is really important. And so we're seeing that with increased sitting, we see less quality sleep down here. 8 to 10 hours of sitting, again, we want you in this we would like you in very good. You know, fairly good would be nice too, but I would say very good ideally. So as you sleep or sit for longer periods of time, we see that it's impacting your sleep, which is, as we know, all vital to health. So I want you to say this out loud for you at home. Sitting is more dangerous than smoking. It's killing more people than HIV and is more treacherous than parachuting. Okay? So it's more dangerous than smoking, killing more people than HIV, and it's more treacherous than parachuting. This is what I'm trying to say. Everybody's going to say this. We are sitting ourselves to death. You guys have to join me. Ready? We are sitting ourselves to death. One more time. We are sitting ourselves to death. You guys at home, we are sitting ourselves to death. We literally are. Okay, so every time you choose to stay in your chair, know that you are choosing to live a shorter life. Okay, and I'm going to share with you why. So prolonged sitting increases the risk of 34 chronic diseases, including obesity, cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases. This is interesting. If you stand for 3 hours a day for 5 days a week, that's 750 additional calories that are burned. In a year, that is 30,000 calories, which is comparable to 9 pounds.
Okay, I'm watching my parents.
10 marathons a year. Excuse me. So if you stand for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Sorry. So what that means is the decisions and things that you choose to do on a regular basis have a cumulative effect. Okay. The more you do things consistently, the more it impacts your body. But just by standing 3 hours a day is comparable to running 10 marathons a year, which is kind of a cool stat, I think. So people who sit 6 hours a day or more, this is why we're sitting ourselves to death. They die earlier than those who sit 3 hours a day or less. So if you have tuned in to any workshop where we discuss sitting at all, I always share this data because I find it fascinating. This is in 2010. The American Cancer Society published a study in the American Journal of Epidemiology. They followed 123,000 individuals, 69,000 women, some 53,000 men for 13 years. And they found that women who were inactive, which basically means sedentary, and sat over 6 hours a day, just 6, sat over 6 hours a day, led a sedentary lifestyle, were 94% more likely to die during that time period studied than those who were physically active and sat less than 3 hours a day. So here you go, die earlier than those who sit 3 hours a day or less. And I would break that down. If you are a woman, you sit 6 hours a day, you're inactive, you're going to die, is what I mean, 94%. Men who were inactive and sat over 6 hours daily were 48% more likely to die than their standing counterparts. I think that's a pretty scary statistic. So this is where I want you to log, think about how many hours a day are you sitting? Because if you're sitting for 6 hours or more, and you tend to be more sedentary, less active, then going back to what I shared in the previous slide, you are at risk for 34 chronic diseases, right? I mean, that is what it's showing. So that's your number that you want to really focus on. How many hours a day are you sitting? And if it's 10, well, how can you chip 2 hours off? You just got to start with, or 1 hour at a time. How can you chip away and slowly over time get it less and less? If you're at 13 hours a day and we're talking, oh, you need to get to 6 tomorrow, that's not realistic, right? So you need to start really creating some goals, realistic goals, to think about how do I get to where I want to go, right? You can ask anybody who works here. There's definitely a transition period because we really don't have much for sitting, and you can talk to Maggie or even Laurie or Amanda. And the first couple weeks are challenging, especially because you're shadowing, you're standing more than you're moving. Because any posture that you're in for extended periods is stressful and detrimental to your health. So you want to be moving, active, right? Once you get moving, you're active, your body adjusts to it. It's like, no, it's not too bad. Don't even notice it, right? So that is number one. Find out how long you're sitting and how can you create a plan to get less than 6 hours a day. Okay. People who sit 6 hours a day or more tend to be overweight, right? You're using your body less. Are 47% more likely to be depressed. Okay. Again, do we have a challenge with mental health in this country? I think there are many reasons. It is multifaceted. There's no question about that. But if you are sitting, you're predisposing yourself to that mental state. So again, how can you design, a plan to get to less sitting? Have at risk for lung and endometrial cancer. And this, even for physically active people, the risk of developing these cancers worsens with every 2 hours increased in sitting time. And that's not the one that I get excited about, because I thought it was. See what my next slide is. So here's my question. Here's my question for you. Let's see. So let's just start here. We'll go back to this. Effects of long-term sitting are not reversible through exercise or other good habits. Let's sit with this for a second. So, how many of you went to school? Let's start with preschool and kindergarten. Okay, how many of you continued on, went through elementary school? Okay, what about middle school, junior high, high school? Okay, so we've got, let's say we started at 5, went through 18. So right there, we've got 13 years. Of those days in school, how many of those hours were sitting? Probably the bulk of them, right? 6 or more. How many of us continued on with further education, whether it's, you know, a community college or college, went on even further, right? So I'm just trying to wrap your brain around the fact that we have all had impacts of long-term sitting that are considered non-reversible in terms of the researchers. You can't reverse the detrimental impacts that sitting has done to your body. And I think sitting, I'll have to look back and see what they identified as long-term sitting. I think it was 3 or 6 months. So what that means is if you're sitting 10, 13, 15 hours a day, you can't just reverse the impacts of that by, oh, I'm going to work out for 2 or 3 hours. I'm sitting for 10, but I'm working out for 2. So that balances it out. What this is finding is it doesn't balance it out. The only way to minimize the risk is to limit the time you're spending sitting on a daily basis. So already we know that if you're sitting less, moving more, you are setting yourself up to succeed in terms of how you age. Setting yourself up to succeed in terms of your health and well-being of your physical body, as well as your mental body, your mental health, your mental body, your brain. And so if anything in this conversation that, you know, I am challenging you with is how can you sit less? What can you do on a regular basis? We say the best position is the next position because we are not meant to be in any one position, you know, even if we're standing all day. That's where some people have treadmills at their desk. That's great. That's where some people can get on headsets or get on, you know, meetings, and they can go for a walk on their meetings, do walking meetings, right? What happens to water? We'll say, what happens to a river at below 32 degrees? What happens to a river when it's freezing? Does it freeze? Sometimes. But it doesn't freeze through. Why does it not freeze? It's below freezing. Movement. Exactly. It is always moving. And so think about that in terms of your spine and your health and your body. You were designed to move. And the less you move, the more you create inflammatory state within the body, less resilience, a poorly flexible body to adapt to the change, right? And so when you're moving your body, and that's the beauty of adjustments, it's very specific input into a spine to make sure that spine is moving, that influences the information the brain is fed to influence how it processes your world, right? Which is huge for kids as they're moving through brain development. Huge for all of us, but it's where it's so impactful for kiddos. So when you move on a daily basis, think about that river, right? That movement is life. The less you move, the faster you're moving towards death. The more you move, the more you're moving towards health and a health state. And that's why, oh, here you go. This is great. So when you think about longevity, if you're sitting less, that increases your longevity. Actually, I'm not really sure what this arrow means, but so let me, so I was going to that. So that's why we do a lot of workshops in spinal hygiene. Like you tune into any spinal hygiene workshop that we've done, we're probably going over a lot of different movements. And it's about how can you target movements in your neck, your mid back, your low back on a regular basis. That's one thing why I love your cervical ranges of motion, because you want to be moving your your spine hundreds of thousands of times on a daily basis in a very healthy way. And that's what you can do with cervical ranges of motion, right? But it all starts with you, right? We are all responsible for the state of our health. We cannot blame that on anybody. You know, if you are seen in this office, you've most likely seen your x-rays. And if you've got any level of degeneration going on in your spine, that means there's lack of movement, unhealthy movement. And it's been there for years and maybe decades, right? And so that alone should be an indicator that you need to be moving and sitting less. And this is what I tell people. Your health is worth buying a standing desk. Standing desks are actually really reasonable in terms of cost these days. But if you're waiting for your work to reimburse you or cover it, stop waiting, because your health is worth it. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, I love this. First step is the awareness of how sitting is truly killing us. The second step is to create a plan to look at how can you sit less and know your numbers. And especially for you who are here and getting care, understanding that how your spine can maintain its longevity, its health over time, understanding that our life, our culture is not moving away from technology. It is like diving headfirst into it. How can we make things more technologically, I don't know, how can we use it more, right? In every way. And that just in and of itself just lends towards more consumption and less movement. And so it's really being intentional around how you're choosing to use your media, you know, and things that you have, but use it in a way that doesn't confine you in a chair, right? So, okay. My hope for you is that you know, got something from this workshop today that will challenge you to choose differently in terms of your choices and your daily habits. And I would love for you, those who are with us on this workshop, is if you could come in and tell me what your number is. How many hours a day are you sitting? And if you can look at designing some type of plan to say, okay, by what time do you want to shave an hour off? Or what's your goal? In the next 3 months, what's your goal to be sitting? And how can you get an accountability buddy with you to support you sitting less? Okay, that's my challenge to you. And my last question is, who do you know that needs to know this information? We do these workshops every Tuesday night. And I think if somebody heard this who works in, you know, a corporate setting, and they heard these numbers as it relates to risk factors when it comes to sitting and how it lends to mental health stress and depression, lends to cancer, or heart disease, lends towards death, then it's information that I think is vital that they hear. And so I ask that you invite or have somebody join you on a workshop, come into the office. We love to be with you in community here, and then just share what you know. So thank you for being here. Dr. Mayakan, if you've got questions, bring them into the office. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask here on Zoom.